Bro, so I was about to go record this video, right? And I was like, okay, I'm going to use a Steam hardware survey to show the 60 class cards are usually the most popular ones and how this generation is going to be disappointing. I went to Nvidia's website and I realized 4 out of 5 of the most popular GPUs are 60 class cards, and they use the Steam hardware survey as evidence. But they're using it to support this claim. They're trying to use the reputation of previous good 60 class cards to justify these ones. I'm just gonna say it right here. That's not gonna work, Nvidia. We're going to be getting the 4060 Ti literally next week at $400 for the 8GB one. And there's gonna be a 16GB model. And the only thing that changed is how much VRAM it has, which is coming in July. And the 4060 non-Ti is coming at $300 also in July. And this is the only redeeming quality I can really find with these GPUs. At least with these ones, compared to say the rest of the lineup, at least these ones don't cost an arm and a leg, okay? They're not jumping that much higher than the last generation prices. In fact, they're about the same. If we look at the 3060, which the 4060 is replacing at $300, the 3060 was $330. So the 4060 actually went down $30 in price. And the 3060 Ti was $400, whereas the new 4060 Ti 8GB model, we'll get to the 16GB one later, is only $400 as well. At least there isn't a ton of price gouging going on here, like necessarily. That's kind of where the good parts end. So let's take a look at the specs that these cards offer. For the 4060 Ti on the left here. Teraflop performance, I don't really care about if I'm being honest. It does offer DLSS 3 and AV1 encoding like everything else in this generation. Interesting thing, which is the VRAM buffer, 8GB and 16GB, which we'll get into the difference between those a little bit later. Okay, what's important to note with the 4060 Ti is that it has 288GB per second of memory bandwidth. Memory speed is really important, guys, compared to the last generation, which had 448 gigabytes per second. That is because the 4060 Ti is on a 128-bit bus instead of last generation on a 256-bit bus. And this is one of the areas that I really think with these GPUs that they're able to get the prices lower despite the world's economic conditions. And Nvidia makes an excuse that the memory bandwidth effectiveness is 554 gigabytes per second. That is because it has more L2 cache. The cache makes up for the memory speed. This isn't true for all applications or all resolutions, so we're gonna have to see how that pans out in the grand scheme of things. We would have rather had the same amount of actual VRAM bandwidth and L2 cache. Now, performance-wise, this places the 4060 Ti basically at a 3070 level performance. As you can see, Nvidia compared the 4060 Ti to the 3060 Ti and the 2060 Super just to show generation on generation performance. If you ignore the games with frame generation, because that isn't a fair comparison, you look at the games without it, it's a little bit ahead of the 3060 Ti, which is basically a 3070. They're basically getting 3070 level performance at $400 instead of $500. But what I find hilarious is what these charts actually show, because they show the 2060 Super compared to the 3060 Ti. And it's just hilarious to see the performance jump from 20 series to 30 series and how impressive that was and how unimpressive this generation is. Honestly, they're shooting themselves in the foot here. How disappointing this generation is. We don't, like, this is the mainstream GPU. Most people don't really care about frame generation, and frame generation may be in a lot of games right now, but it's not in every game out there. And not everybody cares about AV1 encoding. Not everybody cares about the power efficiency of the new card. But you know what everybody cares about? And that is raw performance. Raw performance for your money. The real problem is how the performance of the 4060 Ti sits, and it only has 8GB of VRAM. Hardware Unboxed has done a great series of videos on this with the 3070, only having 8GB of VRAM not reaching the potential it could, even at games in 1080p. Because Nvidia already had to hide this in their benchmarks. You can see in Plague Tale Requiem, they had to put it at the high preset. In Resident Evil Remake, the 8GB of VRAM isn't enough for the 4060 Ti. They're already making a card. They're consciously aware it doesn't have enough VRAM. They're also offering the 16GB one at $500 as an upsell. Right now, VRAM, even at 1080p, is already a problem. It's only going to get worse over time, that they want you to pay that extra $100 from the 8GB model and buy the 16GB one. $100 just for 8 more gigabytes of VRAM is asking a lot when the card is exactly the same other than the VRAM. Now that brings me into the 4060, because at the 4060's price class of $300 and its performance, it's a little bit more excusable for it to have 8GB of VRAM, because this card, typically in benchmarks that we have seen, ignore the frame generation ones again, without frame generation, we can see that it's a little bit ahead of a 3060, I don't know, about 15 to 20%. And that, funnily enough, would put it around the performance of a 3060 Ti. You're getting a 3060 Ti performance, maybe a little worse for $300 instead of $400. And in my opinion, it's kind of excusable to give it 8GB of VRAM. It's not good, don't get me wrong, but it's not that bad either. I think the 4060 overall, it doesn't give you amazing price to performance. It isn't huge generation on generation, getting about 20% faster than its old counterpart, but you're also losing 4GB of VRAM. But I think the 4060 will probably still do well. It's barely hitting what it needs to make enough of an improvement generation on generation for people to be somewhat interested in buying it, but it isn't going to be flying off shelves, don't get me wrong. The real crime, I think, is the 4060 Ti 16GB. This card should have been the only 4060 Ti on the market if Nvidia was really looking for the consumers here, and we all know that Nvidia is not doing that. $400, it's 16GB of VRAM to future-proof it so that you don't buy this card and it's already obsolete the moment you get it. Games already are struggling with 8GB of VRAM even at 1080p. The real crime about the 4060 Ti 16GB at $500, there's already better options. The 6800, guys, has 16GB of VRAM just like the 4060 Ti 16, and the VRAM is actually faster, so you get the extra bandwidth advantage. If you look at the 6800 against the 3070, which is how the 4060 Ti is going to perform, or around in there, the 6800 beats it by 10%. 6700 XT at 12GB of VRAM would be competing pretty close at $320 right now to the 4060 Ti 8GB. The 4060 Ti 8GB, $400. This wouldn't be that far off of it. Like, the options that we have on the market are already really competitive. That this generation coming in, who's gonna get excited for it? It's gonna be a very similar thing to how the 4070 went. I will say that the 4060 non-Ti is probably the only one that is pretty competitive. It's going to outperform this GPU, the RX 6700 non-XT, but the 6700 does have 10GB of VRAM, which is good to see. And it also costs $280. So price to performance, the 4060 non-Ti at $300 is going to be about the same. And what gets me confused is I'm wondering if Nvidia is wondering why this generation is not selling that well. And it's because everything out there is just, it's barely an upgrade on the past generation. Not many people care about the new features or the better power efficiency. After all this of basically Nvidia making the least exciting generation ever, it seems like they're going to use their pretty big margins on their products to give away a bunch of graphics cards. Bro, we can see right through this. Now, I will say that this giveaway that they're doing this summer of 2023 is a big giveaway. In total, they're giving away 460 graphics cards to celebrate the 4060 in the summer in July. But this is clearly a PR move trying to get people excited for these graphics cards, and it might work, but I don't think that many people are going to be excited about it. What I find kind of sad though is that these are the 60 class cards for the 4000 series generation, and eventually, like, after everything else sells out, these are going to be people's only options. And, you know, even these aren't exciting, eventually people are going to buy them. Like, we can realistically only like boycott buying GPUs or justify not getting them for so long. And eventually people are going to start buying these. And then when you see the Steam hardware survey, there's probably going to be 4060s on here at some point in time. I don't think this is going to happen quickly, but it will probably happen eventually. And all we can hope for is that when we get to that point where people have to start buying these, hopefully the prices come down. But we don't really know because we see how Nvidia is treating the 4070. Instead of dropping the prices of their cards, they are actually just making less of them. So they want to keep their prices how they are. These 4060s, 4060 Ti's, they aren't bad value. You can see the clear market manipulation with the 16 gigabyte model of the 4060 Ti. At that $500 price point, you're basically just getting a 3070 with 16 gigabytes of RAM. Let me know if you guys are going to buy the 4060 Ti. I mean, you might be at a point where you need to upgrade anyways, and these aren't that bad. It's nice you do get AV1 and frame generation if you're interested in that stuff. But I also think it's hilarious that they market these cards as 1080p cards, but you're paying $400 for 1080p performance. It's getting out of the realistic price range for a lot of people. But you know the words that solve all problems on planet Earth, and that is, it is what it is. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.